Welcome to part 4 of worship musician training. This is going to be split up into a few different parts because talking about rhythm, there's a lot to talk about, and I want to keep each of these videos really simple as possible. And since there's so much involved with rhythm, um, I'm going to break this up into 3 parts. So this is part 4, part 1, I guess. In this series on rhythm. So each of these parts is going to be, again, I'm off frame, hope that's okay. This first part is going to be on note values, and the second video is going to be time signatures, and the third part is going to be rhythmic solfege. Remember the last video we talked about solfege for harmony, for melody, for the notes in the scale. There's also solfege for rhythm. Note values, it's these. These are notes, right? And on a grand staff or on a staff, you have a treble clef, and each of these notes goes on a specific line or space, which tells you if it's a G or if it's a C or something like that. But the shape of the note tells you the rhythm or the value of the note. And to start off with, we have a open note head with no stem. This is the whole note. And I'm also going to be describing each of these in terms of fractions. So the whole note, 1/1. And you'll notice how there's kind of a progression of each of these is just getting slightly different from each other. After the whole note is the half note, and that is an open note head with a stem. 1/2. A half note. Next, we have a closed note head with a stem, which is a quarter note, if you can see the pattern developing. So that's 1/4. Next, when we have that closed note head and a stem, and we add a flag to it, with this little flag right here, or a beam when we have 2 of these together, that is an 1/8 note. And again, both of these are examples of 1/8 notes right here. When you have 2 1/8 notes next to each other and they are within the same beat, which is again something else to talk about, they are connected with a beam. And when you have a single 1/8 note by itself, or it's 2 1/8 notes together, but they are separated by 2 different beats, then they are written with a flag. Okay, and then when we add a second flag, basically we get a 16th note. So thinking about notes in terms of fractions is important because, well, that's how they're named. And the value of each of these eventually is going to add up. So in a measure of music, let's take an example of a measure of 4/4 time signature. We haven't talked about it yet, but 4/4 time. It's the most common. There's 4 beats in every measure, and the quarter note gets the beat. Well, that means we have to have an equivalent of 4 quarter notes, or 1 whole note, or 2 half notes, or 8 1/8 notes, or 6 16th notes. We have to have some equivalent or amalgamation of all those that comes up to equal the value of the measure. And the value of the measure is set by the time signature, and that's something we'll talk about in the next video. This is just about the note values and what they are and what they look like and how they relate to each other. You notice that each of them progressively getting smaller is cut in half. There is one more thing to talk about with note value, and that is the dotted note. So let me draw an example of that right here. I'll just draw a simple half note with a dot. So a dotted note, any kind of dotted note, we're using fractions, we're using math here a little bit, that has a formula for what the dot does, essentially. So, and I'll draw this formula here. The dotted note equals I'll just draw an equal sign here, but this is the dotted note here. So a dotted note equals the number, which is the note value, or n is what I'll use. The original note value, in this case it's a half note, plus parentheses 1/2 of the note value itself. So this is the formula for a dotted note. This works for whether you have a dotted quarter note, dotted half note, dotted whole note, dotted eighth note, dotted 16th note, any of them. This formula applies, and it's just whichever note value you are, dotting is what will change here. So you have the original note value, a half note in this case, plus 1/2 of a half note. Again, in the case of the dotted half note, if that was a quarter note, it would be 1/4 note plus 1/2 of a quarter note, which is an eighth. So essentially, a dotted half note is the same as 3/4 notes. A dotted quarter note is the same as 3/8 notes. Is the same note value. Right. I think that's all I have to explain about note value. Next up, we'll be talking about time signatures.